The Sefer Hanoc has always been a mystery. And in fact, there have been many people who have read it and said, well, that book needs to be burned. And it has been burned, and it's been shredded, and it's been tossed out and ripped up and thrown out, denounced, and everything else. But with remarkable temerity, it keeps on returning. Now, for those who say, well, look, this is a fraud, this is a forgery, and it should never be counted on, that's open contradiction to a lot of the church fathers like Origen, like Tertullian, like Justin Martyr, who believed that the Sefer Hanoc was, in fact, scripture. And there's a very direct quote from Tertullian we'll be talking about later on, where he says, look, because it considers messianic prophecies, it necessarily is something that the believer in the Messiah should be reading. I want to share with you just this opening passage from the book of Enoch, because why was everybody else so uptight about this book back in the olden days? Well, there's a reason why. It wasn't written for them, right? So Enoch 1:1, it says, the word of the blessing of Hanoc, which means the dedicated one, how he blessed the elect, another critical word we're going to find in Enoch, and the righteous who were to exist in the time of trouble. And that is us. We're existing in the time of trouble. Many of us don't know that yet, but we're existing in the time of trouble. And rejecting all the unrighteous and wicked. Okay? So the book is directed for those people who would be living in the time of trouble. And this is the time we're entering into. And it is a disclosure not only of the things that happened in the past, but also the things that would happen in the future. Now, there are people who say, well, it's clearly a forgery or a fraud. We're going to take a look during the program here at a picture of a Dead Sea Scroll fragment. And we're going to look in particular at the quote that's on that Dead Sea Scroll fragment to see what it was that was being read by the Essenes at Qumran prior to the arrival of Mashiach, or prior to the arrival of even Yahuchanan the Baptist, John the Baptist. And what we're going to discover is that there were 10 separate fragments found at Qumran, indicating that the book was, in fact, relied upon. It was one of the most dominant fragments that they found. That in the book of Jubilees were very dominant at Qumran in Cave 4. So you have other people who have said, oh, no, we accept this book. Now, the people who reject the book outright obviously also reject the opinion of the Essenes. They also reject the opinion of Tertullian. They reject the opinion of Origen. They reject the opinion of Justin Martyr, all very close church fathers who existed in the 2nd century, who were very close to the original apostles and their immediate disciples, including the 70 and the appointees of the 70. So, it's very difficult to say, well, I'm not going to believe it because I don't want to. And the people who say it's a forgery ignore the fact that the Ethiopian Bible has had the book of Hanoc in it since the 2nd century at a bare minimum. The first Bible in the world, the Ethiopian Bible, had the book of Hanoc and the book of Yophalim or Jubilees within its binding as early as the 2nd century. So, I don't believe it was written by Enoch. Well, none of the books that we have today were written by the original authors. Everything is a copy. Everything is a copy. There is no original. So even when you look at the Dead Sea Scroll transcriptions of the book of Isaiah or the Tehillim, the Psalms, all of these are copies. They're copies of other manuscripts that existed at that time. So do we know that the information that was given in the book of Hanoc is not ancient? On its face, it claims to be ancient, and in fact, more ancient than the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, most scholars, none of whom have put the Epic of Gilgamesh through the same ringer that they put through the book of Hanoc, because the Epic of Gilgamesh certainly wasn't found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, although the Scroll of the Giants referencing Gilgamesh was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that Gilgamesh was, in fact, a Nephilim, and he was a descendant of what Enoch would say was the Watchers. And so we have a very curious record in Hanoc. And the curious record in Hanoc, an antediluvian work, that is to say, a pre-flood story. This pre-flood story is going to give us a unique rendition of events, and it's unique compared to the Hindu record. It's unique compared to the Sumerian record. It's unique compared to the Egyptian record, and it's unique compared to the Greek record. Because in all four of those records, you have this very similar story. Gods came to the earth and had relations with subprimates who then created mankind to be the servants of these gods for purposes of harvesting gold and silver and possibly platinum or palladium in order to have some kind of monatomic metal. Okay, so this is a nice story. And if you read the Sumerian record, the Hindu record, the Greek record, the Egyptian record, they all talk about the same thing, that these gods did in fact have relations with human women. And as a result of those relations, they created demigods or semigods or whatever, half god, half man. And so when you read about the story of Hercules, or you read about the story of Apollo or the story of Achilles, you're talking about people who were half God, half men. But we would understand and should understand that those gods that were referenced in all of that mythology were not gods at all, but instead watchers that were identified first in the book of Hanoc. And Hanoc is the one who says, look, that's not true that these gods came to earth and created mankind. Mankind was created by Yahweh, who breathed the Neshama Chaim into the nostrils of the Adamah, the dirt, the ground, breathed his name, the Neshama Chaim, into the nostrils of the Adamah, and from that, a living soul, a Nefesh Chaya, was created, called Adam. And so this is the record that we get in Scripture. Now, people will say, well, Elohim is a plural word, and Elohim being a plural word, that means gods. Therefore, it was the gods who were really the watchers who created mankind. And there's all kinds of nonsense out there about how Yah or Yahweh, but more assuredly, Yah is the name they use in the literature, was this evil war god who lives down in Antarctica and who, created mankind, but there was a god above him that created him. Now, this is an artificial, extrapolated record from the Sumerian record. In other words, it is a spin on what the Sumerian record says. I'm going to clarify that record later on this year. I'm going to clarify what was actually in that record and how that record was derived from the Paleo-Hebrew, derived from the Paleo-Hebrew story, that history that evolved through the Paleo-Hebrew, rather than the Sumerian record being the first record on earth. Because again, Hanoc tells us, no, this book was created before the flood. And equally important, in the book of Yashar and in the book of Yovelim, or Jubilees, we have a discussion that indicates that scrolls of ancient writing were taken on the ark, and that those scrolls were secreted by Shem, who later had those scrolls.